Our silly game saved my daughter's life. When my daughter Iris was 7, she became obsessed with this idea that we needed a secret way to communicate in emergencies. She'd just learned about World War II codebreakers in school and was convinced that every family needed their own private language. I thought it was adorable, so I played along. We spent an entire weekend creating what she called the sunshine system because she wanted it to sound happy and innocent. Red balloons meant danger or I'm not safe. Visiting Aunt Clara meant call the police, even though we didn't have an Aunt Clara. Piano lessons meant someone is hurting me, which was darkly specific for a 7-year-old. Making lemonade meant I'm scared but can't talk freely. The beach house meant I'm being taken somewhere against my will, referencing our family vacation spot in Mendocino. We practiced it like a game for months, slipping coded phrases into normal conversations at dinner or during car rides. If I said I was thinking about red balloons, Iris would immediately respond with the safety phrase, which was Dad bought flowers, meaning everything is actually fine. If she didn't respond with that phrase, I was supposed to take her seriously. By the time Iris turned 10, we'd mostly forgotten about the sunshine system. Life got busy with her soccer schedule and my work deadlines and her friend drama. The code became something we joked about occasionally, like, "Remember when you made me learn all those weird phrases?" But I'd noticed she still used some of them without thinking, the way you might still knock on wood or avoid cracks in sidewalks from childhood superstitions. She'd mention red balloons when she was anxious about a test, or say she needed piano lessons when she was overwhelmed. It had become part of her emotional vocabulary, without either of us really noticing. When Iris turned 14, she started dating a boy named Cody from her freshman class. He seemed fine at first, polite when he came to pick her up, decent grades, played JV basketball. My ex-wife liked him because he was on the student council. I had a weird feeling about him that I couldn't explain, something about how he'd steer Iris away from her friends when they hung out in groups, but I chalked it up to being an overprotective dad. 3 months into their relationship, Iris's texts started changing. She'd always been a frequent texter, sending me memes and random thoughts throughout the day. But suddenly her messages got shorter and less frequent. When I'd ask how school was, she'd respond with one-word answers. When I'd suggest we grab dinner, she'd say she had plans with Cody. I mentioned it to my ex-wife, but she said I was being paranoid and that teenagers naturally pull away from their parents. She said Iris was just growing up and I needed to give her space. The texts that did come through seemed fine on the surface, but something felt off. They sounded like Iris, but also not quite right, too formal, too careful, missing the random tangents and emoji spam that usually characterized her messages. Then, on a Wednesday night, I got a text that made me pause. Had a great day today. Cody took me to look at red balloons for the Valentine's dance. We might do piano lessons together since we both need to learn. The dance committee is thinking about having it at the beach house venue, thinking of making lemonade for the bake sale. My hands started shaking as I read it. Every single sentence contained a code phrase: red balloons, piano lessons, beach house, making lemonade, but there was no safety phrase, no Dad bought flowers to indicate she was joking. I stared at my phone trying to convince myself I was overreacting, that she was just randomly using phrases that happened to match our old code. But Iris never mentioned the Valentine's dance to me before. She wasn't on the dance committee, and we didn't have a beach house venue in town. She'd deliberately packed every warning signal into one message, which meant this wasn't accidental. Someone was hurting her, someone was making her scared, and she couldn't tell me directly. I immediately called her phone, but it went straight to voicemail. I tried 3 more times with the same result. I texted asking if she was okay, and got no response. I called my ex-wife, who said Iris was sleeping over at her friend Mallory's house, and I was being ridiculous for panicking over nothing. I drove to Mallory's house anyway, and rang the doorbell at 9:30 at night. Mallory's mom answered looking confused and said Iris wasn't there, that she hadn't seen Iris in weeks actually. She asked if everything was okay, and I mumbled something about mixed-up plans before running back to my car. I called my ex-wife again, and she finally admitted that Iris wasn't at Mallory's. She was actually staying at Cody's house because his parents were out of town, and she was helping him study. The casual way she said it made my blood boil. Our 14-year-old daughter was at her boyfriend's house overnight with no adults present, and my ex thought that was fine. I asked for Cody's address, and she refused to give it to me, saying I was going to embarrass Iris by showing up like a crazy person. We argued for 5 minutes before she finally sent me the address just to get me off the phone. I drove there going 20 over the speed limit, my mind racing through all the worst possibilities. What if I was wrong and Iris really was just randomly using old phrases? What if I burst in there and humiliated her in front of her boyfriend? But what if I was right and something terrible was happening? When I pulled up to Cody's house, all the lights were off except for one upstairs window. I sat in my car for a minute trying to decide what to do. Then I saw movement in the lit window, someone pacing back and forth, and I heard yelling, male voice, loud and angry, though I couldn't make out the words. I got out of the car and tried the front door, which was unlocked. The house was trashed, furniture knocked over in the living room, broken glass on the kitchen floor. I took the stairs two at a time and followed the sound of Cody's voice to a bedroom at the end of the hall. The door was closed but not locked. I could hear him screaming about Iris texting people and how she wasn't allowed to talk to anyone without his permission. I heard Iris crying and saying she was just texting her dad about school stuff. Cody called her a liar and said he'd seen the message and knew she was trying to signal someone. That's when I realized he'd partially figured out the code. He didn't know what the phrases meant specifically, but he knew she was communicating something beyond the literal words. I opened the door and found Iris backed into a corner, her phone smashed on the floor, and Cody standing over her with his fist raised. When he saw me, he lowered his hand and tried to switch to his polite tone, saying, "Hey, Mr. Wallace, we were just having a disagreement." But I could see the red mark on Iris's face where he'd already hit her. I told Iris to come with me right now, and Cody stepped in front of her, blocking my path. He said Iris didn't want to leave, that she was staying with him, and I needed to get out of his house. Iris was crying harder now and trying to move toward me, but Cody grabbed her arm and yanked her back. That's when I saw the bruises, dark purple marks running up her forearm in the clear shape of fingerprints. I stepped forward and shoved Cody hard enough that he stumbled backward and let go of Iris. She ran to me, and I positioned myself between her and Cody. He was yelling about how I couldn't just come into his house and assault him, that he was calling the police on me. I told him to go ahead and call them, that they'd be very interested in the bruises on my daughter's arm. We were backing toward the door when Cody's whole demeanor changed. The polite mask completely dropped, and I saw what Iris had been dealing with. Pure rage twisted his face as he grabbed a baseball bat from beside his desk. He said nobody was leaving until Iris admitted she was a lying bitch and apologized for trying to get him in trouble. I pushed Iris behind me and told her to run downstairs and get to my car. She hesitated, and I screamed at her to go now. She ran, and I heard her footsteps thundering down the stairs. Cody tried to get past me to follow her, and when I blocked him, he swung the bat at my head. I barely ducked in time and felt it whistle past my ear. He swung again, and this time connected with my shoulder, sending white-hot pain shooting down my arm. I tackled him before he could swing a third time, and we crashed into his desk, scattering papers and electronics everywhere. We fought on the floor, him trying to reach the bat, and me trying to keep him pinned. He was stronger than I expected, and managed to shove me off. I scrambled backward as he stood up with the bat raised again. That's when I heard sirens getting closer. Iris must have called 911 from my car. Cody heard them too and froze, the bat still raised above his head. His eyes darted between me and the window and the door, calculating whether he could finish what he started before the police arrived. I saw him make the decision to run. He dropped the bat and bolted past me, shoving me into the wall as he went. I heard him crashing down the stairs and then the back door slamming. By the time I made it downstairs, red and blue lights were flooding through the front windows, and 2 police officers were coming through the door with their hands on their weapons. I raised my hands and started explaining who I was and what happened, the words tumbling out in a confused rush. One officer went to check on Iris in my car while the other took my statement. Within minutes, more units arrived and started searching the area for Cody. An officer found him hiding in his neighbor's shed 20 minutes later. They brought him back in handcuffs, and he was yelling the whole time about how this was all a misunderstanding, and I'd attacked him in his own house. But then Iris showed the officers her bruises and told them about the months of escalating control and violence. They took photographs of Iris's injuries under the bright lights of the police cruiser, and I saw bruises I hadn't noticed before. Fingerprints on her upper arms, a faded black eye she'd covered with makeup, marks on her neck that were shaped like hands. The photographer documented everything while Iris stood there shaking and crying. The officers asked if we wanted to press charges, and I said yes immediately. One of them explained that with the physical evidence and the witnessed assault with the bat, Cody would likely be charged with multiple felonies including assault, battery, and false imprisonment. They took Iris's smashed phone as evidence and collected the bat from upstairs. A female detective arrived and took Iris to a separate car to give a more detailed statement. I watched through the window as my daughter described months of abuse while the detective took notes. My ex-wife showed up 30 minutes later, having gotten a call from one of the officers. She took one look at Iris's bruises and started crying. She kept saying she didn't know, she had no idea this was happening, and I wanted to scream at her for not believing me when I said something felt wrong. They took us to the hospital to document Iris's injuries more thoroughly and check for any that weren't visible. The doctor who examined her found 3 cracked ribs, extensive bruising across her torso, and signs of strangulation from a week prior that she'd hidden under turtlenecks. Each new injury made me feel sicker. The doctor very gently asked Iris if there had been any sexual assault, and Iris shook her head. No, thank God. They kept her overnight for observation and gave her resources for counseling and support groups. The detective came by the next morning to tell us that Cody had been charged with aggravated assault, battery, false imprisonment, and assault with a deadly weapon for the bat. He was being held on a $100,000 bail that his parents couldn't afford. The detective said they'd done a deeper investigation and found texts from Cody to his friends bragging about controlling his girlfriend and posting photos of Iris crying with captions about putting her in her place, social media evidence that would make the case against him much stronger. Over the next few days, the full story came out. Cody had started getting possessive about a month into their relationship, checking Iris's phone constantly and getting angry if she talked to other boys. He'd isolated her from her friends by starting fights whenever she made plans without him. He'd started pushing her around during arguments, then progressing to slapping and punching. He'd threatened to kill himself if she ever tried to break up with him, showing her pills he'd supposedly collected for that purpose. He'd convinced her that nobody would believe her if she told anyone, that he'd make sure she got blamed for everything, and it had worked. Iris had been trapped, terrified, and completely alone because he'd systematically cut her off from her support system. The only thing he hadn't controlled was that one text message, the one she'd managed to send while he was in the bathroom. She'd packed it full of every code phrase she could remember, praying I'd recognize them after all these years. She told me later she'd almost given up hope that I'd notice, that she thought maybe I'd forgotten the system, or would think she was just using random words. The preliminary hearing happened 3 weeks later. Iris had to testify about the abuse while Cody sat 20 feet away glaring at her. She was terrified, but got through it, her voice shaking but clear as she described each incident. The judge found probable cause for all charges and ordered Cody to stay away from Iris, our house, her school, and any place she was likely to be. A restraining order was issued, and he was fitted with an ankle monitor when his parents finally scraped together bail money. The trial was scheduled for 6 months later, and the prosecutor told us the evidence was strong enough that Cody's lawyer was already discussing a plea deal. In the meantime, Iris started therapy twice a week with a counselor who specialized in domestic violence survivors. She was diagnosed with PTSD and put on medication for the panic attacks that had started after that night. She'd wake up screaming from nightmares where Cody was chasing her or hurting her. She couldn't be in enclosed spaces without panicking. She stopped eating and lost 15 pounds in a month. Watching her struggle was almost harder than the night I'd found her. My ex-wife and I had several difficult conversations about how we'd missed the signs. She admitted she'd wanted to believe Iris was in a normal teenage relationship because acknowledging the red flags would have meant admitting she'd failed to protect our daughter. She'd convinced herself that the bruises Iris explained away as soccer injuries were actually from soccer, that the weight loss was just teen diet culture, that the isolation from friends was normal relationship behavior. She'd seen what she wanted to see instead of what was actually there. We started family therapy together to work through the guilt and figure out how to better support Iris. The therapist explained that abusers are often very skilled at appearing normal to parents and authority figures while terrorizing their victims in private, that it's common for families to miss warning signs because the abuse is carefully hidden. It helped a little, but I still felt like I'd failed Iris by not seeing what was happening sooner. 6 months after that night, Cody took a plea deal rather than face trial. He pled guilty to aggravated assault and battery in exchange for the other charges being dropped. He was sentenced to 3 years in juvenile detention, followed by 2 years of supervised probation. He'd have to complete anger management and domestic violence prevention programs. There would be a permanent restraining order keeping him away from Iris. It wasn't as much time as I wanted him to serve, but the prosecutor explained that getting a longer sentence would have required putting Iris through a full trial where she'd be cross-examined and re-traumatized. She said this was the best outcome we could realistically hope for. Iris sobbed with relief when the judge announced the sentence, like she'd been holding her breath for months, waiting to hear that he'd actually face consequences. At sentencing, Cody's lawyer tried to paint him as a troubled kid who'd made mistakes, but the judge wasn't having it. She looked at Cody and told him directly that what he'd done was domestic violence, that he'd systematically terrorized a young girl, and that he was lucky to be in juvenile court instead of being tried as an adult. Iris is 17 now, 3 years after that night. She still goes to therapy every week and probably will for years. She's wary around boys her age and hasn't dated anyone since. She still has panic attacks sometimes, triggered by things that remind her of Cody, like a certain cologne or aggressive behavior in movies. But she's healing slowly. She rejoined her soccer team and reconnected with friends she'd lost. She's applying to colleges and talking about studying psychology to help other abuse survivors. She started a support group at her school for teen relationship violence, sharing her story to help other kids recognize warning signs. She's turned her trauma into advocacy, which her therapist says is a healthy way to reclaim power. and we still use the sunshine system, but now we've expanded it and made it more sophisticated. Red balloons still means danger. We've added new phrases for specific situations. Thinking about summer camp means I'm being followed. The garden needs watering means I'm in physical danger. Looking at old photos means I need you right now but can't explain why. Iris made me promise to teach the system to any future romantic partners I have seriously date, so they'd have a way to communicate if they ever felt unsafe. She wants it to be something multiple people in her life know, not just me. She taught it to her 2 closest friends as well, and they practiced it until it became second nature. They've already used it twice in situations that weren't emergencies, but could have become dangerous. Once when a guy at a party wouldn't take no for an answer, and once when a friend's ex started showing stalker behavior. The code gave them a way to signal for help without escalating situations publicly. Iris also started teaching younger kids about creating their own family codes as a safety tool. She volunteers at a youth center and runs workshops about personal safety, including communication strategies for when you can't speak freely. She emphasizes that these codes should be taught and practiced regularly so they become automatic in crisis situations. The kids love it because it feels like a game, but Iris makes sure they understand it's a serious tool that could save their lives someday. Appreciate you watching this far. If you enjoyed it, drop a like, leave a comment, and subscribe so you won't miss the next story.